Hello, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Geert-Jan Klaassen. I am responsible for TeamAid in the Netherlands and the Nordics. And I would like to welcome you to today's webinar presented by Norbert Kouwenberg, Audit Director of ABN AMRO, and also Chairman of the Professional Practice Committee of the IIA in the Netherlands. Today's topic is a multi-purpose audit universe, the pros, cons, and necessities. And before we begin the presentation, there are a few quick housekeeping items to point out. Technical questions or issues can be submitted at any time during the presentation by selecting the orange help or question mark widget on your screen. If you have any content or topical questions, please submit those using the red Ask Question widget. We will try to reserve some time at the end of the presentation to answer as many of your questions as we can. And we will also try to answer a few during the polling questions. If we cannot respond to your question, we can follow it up via email after the presentation. As mentioned, there will be several polling questions throughout the presentations, and you will be able to respond to them directly within the application. Be sure to mark your selection and then select the submit button as they come up. The submit button may not be visible immediately, but you may have to scroll down the page a little bit before you submit. Please note that we cannot track or any polling responses via the chat. As you know, attendees of this webinar will receive 1 CPE credit, but you must answer at least 3 of the polling questions and also at least attend 50 minutes of today's presentation. Our webinar platform will keep track of this, and you will be able to download your CPE certificate immediately after the webinar. You can also download it from an email which will be sent to all attendees 24 hours after the webinar. A PDF of the slides is available now as a download in the blue related content widget. We've also added some other relevant and helpful content in this section. Lastly, a recording of this webinar will be sent out to all registrants for on-demand viewing approximately 1 day after the live webinar in the same email as the CPE certificates. I'll give the spotlights to Norbert Kouwenberg, and I'm wishing you an informative webinar. Norbert?
Thank you for the introduction, Geert-Jan. Well, it's a pleasure for me, and also I feel honored to give this presentation for all the attendees. Before starting, I got the information that some 50 to 75% of all the attendees are coming from internal audit departments. So I hope that the slang I'm going to use is not very difficult to understand for you. This presentation, a webinar, the next 60 minutes is about the use of a multi-purpose audit universe. The pros, the cons, and the necessities. Why do you need it? Maybe not now, but in the next years to come. And as Galileo already said in the 16th century, the truth is out there in the universe. It's just a matter for us to discover it. And I hope with you together in the next 60 minutes, we're going to discover this. As the learning objectives for today are to get more awareness on the evolving needs of our stakeholders, which choices we have to make in the universe to align with our reporting needs, and what to do with all kind of increasing requests coming from outside. The planning of our work in the universe compared to the coverage on reporting we do. And of course, like I said, the pros and cons of a multi-dimensional universe. My name is Norbert Kouwenberg. Like Geert-Jan said, I'm working in ABN AMRO for a long time. You can visit me via the QR code on LinkedIn. I'm happy to make links and to answer any other questions coming up. To start this presentation and to start your work, it's all about, of course, your mission. And I suppose your mission is quite aligned with the mission of internal audit as the association, the institute. It's about providing assurance. Now, this sounds very easy, providing assurance, but I suppose the translation of how to do this and what it is different per, well, at least per attendee in this seminar. So how do you translate providing assurance to your stakeholder in reporting and in messagings? In a survey we conducted in the IEA some years ago, some 2.5 years ago, we came to the conclusion that a lot of us provide assurance via testing the level of effectiveness of controls. And a lot of us also, a little bit less, about the level of residual risks remaining after the control framework is working. Other ones are testing the efficiency, or in my case, we are testing how the control framework attributes to achieving objectives for the company. By the way, you can see that the numbers are adding up over 100 because the respondees could fill in more than one part of the objective for their products they're going to deliver. Now, the interesting thing is, of course, then, is your assurance based on a sound internal control system? Is it about understanding the risks, or is it something about achieving business objectives? In our case, we use the COAS ERM, not maybe the latest model, but we use this model as it is also used in the company itself. We test the controls in the control environment, and we say something about how this attributes to the company's business objectives. This is how we translate providing assurance. Likely, you will do it different. This is not only about, say, the type of message you give, whether it's about the level of effectiveness of controls you tested, or about the efficiency of controls you tested, or something about the residual of the risks which are still there after you tested your controls, or something about the quality of the framework which is there for achieving objectives. But it's also about the type of products, the type of an audit work you do. Is it about products in the company? Is it maybe about the subsidiaries somewhere abroad? Is it doing audit work in entities in Europe or outside? Or is it something to do testing all kind of regulations? You might test activities, or you might test all kind of reports sent outside to third parties. It's going to be difficult because many choices to make. How do you provide your assurance both in content, in your definition of assurance, but also about the topics where you're going to give assurance about? And that comes me to the next question. That brings me to the next question. If you provide assurance, do you also think ahead? Where do you allocate your audit time to? Because the Audit Universe likely is the start of preparing your planning for audit work. And do you then structure your universe towards organizational structure of the company, the global footprint, financial processes? Maybe you include IT processes, maybe product flows, or something else. And if you then provide assurance based on the planning of the work you've done, do you then report only to your stakeholders like they are board and audit committee? Or maybe you also have stakeholders like local management, supervisors for financial markets, our case, like the banking supervisor ECB. But I can imagine you also maybe have to report to consumer groups, or you have to report to the board on corporate governance, which is going to be public, or something else. The focus of your time is therefore very relevant, and the universe is providing you information where to focus upon. So would you then structure your universe into business processes, product lines, value chains, or something else? Or maybe you say, we don't structure. This is the first poll, and I would really be interested in understanding your personal experience or your background. And please feel free to think about this a moment and then to fill in A to E. It's also relevant to fill in and to attend this poll, as it is one of the mandatory things to get your CPE points. So I think everybody should be able to fill in A to E. In our company, by the way, it's something else, but we will see that later. I'm very curious to understand how you are doing in your company.
Yes, let's see. 76% of the attendees has responded so far. We're hitting the 80% mark. Please don't hesitate too much, because in the interest of time, we can't stay here forever, of course. So. Right, I'm counting down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
So what is the general message, Geert-Jan? I'm curious.
Let's have a look. Wow, that's quite obvious.
Yeah, most of us structure towards business processes and entities. This is also, to my experience and knowledge, something we indeed do, most of us. It's easy to understand because it's a translation of our company, how it is structured into the universe. So that's a great first step to prepare the universe. So thank you for attending in this poll. And I suppose that indeed providing assurance, the question is, and I think I missed one slide, but anyway. So if you indeed plan your universe, it's important to not only prepare with the sound methodology how you structure your universe, to understand that you have sufficient and qualified staff who understand your company to make this translation, but also think about what it is your assurance will be about, what it is that your universe needs to be planned upon, and the coverage you want to achieve, how you're going to aggregate your findings and opinions for the coverage of your conclusions. And indeed, also to think about that your universe will be the base, how you will be able to aggregate your audit work and conclusions to a diversity of stakeholders. So it sounds a little bit strange, but in the end, the universe itself can only be created with the beginning as the end in mind. So you have to think backwards. What is it that you will provide assurance about? How will your conclusions look like? So with this in mind, and the stakeholders you have to provide assurance to, how are you going to structure the audit universe? So this end in mind is therefore important to think about. Well, the end for an auditor is something more feasible, like what it is that you're going to give assurance about. Is it about the design and effectiveness of the controls? Is it maybe to provide an early warning function on all kinds of risks able to materialize in this control framework? Or is it to say something about yes, no, to be compliant with laws and regulations? Do you have to cover mandatory topics in the company because supervisors are requesting? And this is, by the way, in my area, quite the case nowadays. We have to do a lot of mandatory topics where we have to share our work, both on content, audit file, and conclusions, to the supervisor directly. So this is a new trend coming up. Or do you help business management for all kinds of special requests, fraud investigations, or covering large change programs like IT changes, or maybe only to cover your year plan because it's carved in stone? Now, the last one, I don't think so, but anyway. In the end, preparing with your universe, risk assessment, and your year plan, it's all about allocating time management. You can only perform your year plan once. You can, of course, adjust during the year, but when it's over, after the year, you have to think about, did I achieve sufficient coverage and evidence to make all the conclusions I need towards my stakeholders, internal, external, and do I have sufficient coverage for these conclusions? So if you allocate time and resources, do you then allocate them to the highest business risks, to the important laws and regulations in the control framework, or to the business processes with the highest inherent risks, or regarding governance processes and change programs? And when you do so, do you then consider that you really have to finalize your year plan? Or are you able to say, well, I'm flexible. I started the year with my year plan, but it's going to be changing every month of the year? Do you consider how to aggregate conclusions on all kinds of topics in your audit work towards themes, maybe specific laws or policies you have to cover? And do you also understand and take into account that if you make conclusions, that they have to be based on a full coverage of the area the conclusion is about? And some people will say, well, I have cyclical work, or other ones will say, no, I'm going to do yearly coverage on all kinds of topics. Well, these things, of course, are very important to understand after you prepared the audit year plan and the Audit Universe. How are you going to conduct your work and making your conclusions towards your stakeholders? In the past, it used to be quite simple. So we had everything in our mind. Paperwork was covered in an inventory somewhere. Policies were on paper. Lots of resources were available. Mail was not electronic but by paper. Everything was easy to do. Nowadays, things are quite more complex. So most of us here in this webinar will say, we're going to do operational audits on everything we do. And in these operational audits, we will take into account all kinds of IT controls. So that's also going to be mixed in our audit work. Some of you will say, well, financial audit is also relevant, so that's also included in my work. And other ones will say, well, the governance of the company will also be included. It's not easy to understand, of course, where you're going to focus upon. Whether will it be a mix? Will it be a sole operational environment? But even if you've made these choices, it's going to be relevant to understand, to take into account the data quality you're analyzing, the data integrity you're dealing with, to say something and to take into account the culture and behavioral aspects of the company and the departments you're auditing in, and also about the laws and regulations. And there are a lot coming up, laws and regulations. So in your audit work, my question is, do you take them into account? And there are a lot. So in my environment, I've got a lot of things to do with, for example, DORA, with PERDAG, Basel IV, CRR 3, but also the Cyber Resilience Act. And maybe you can think about these ones are always included in my audit work, but it's going to be different if they are included in audit 22437 in the audit year plan. And then to say, well, I've seen some things not okay. Or can you also include a real conclusion about this law or regulation? Next poll is coming up. The question is, do you experience an increasing need for audit work relating to upcoming regulation? Yes, I feel. Yes, and it's conflicting with my regular audit work because it's really messing in my planning. Or no, that's not something for me. We're not going to do audit work on these topics. This is for legal department, compliance department, or operation departments.
Yes, let's see what the audience does. Okay, it's moving fast. We're at 86% already. I'll wait a few more seconds before we close the poll again. Please be aware that you need to submit your polling answers also to get your CPE credits. %, and I will close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1.
And the outcome is, it's a diverse outcome. So indeed, most of us experience an increasing need for audit work, and a quarter of the population here is also experiencing that there is a conflicting situation with regular audit work. Well, in my own environment, I also have this experience. So you're planning your year, suddenly something comes up because a regulator wants evidence, a report, a conclusion on a specific topic. And this is very relevant for a regulator, but not specifically relevant for our company. So therefore, it's really sometimes conflict with regular audit work. That's one thing, so that's capacity. And the other thing is that the eyes of a regulator or the eyes of upcoming regulation are different than the way we have planned audit work. So like I said some minutes ago, sometimes you have done, or you plan maybe 50 audits a year. And in audit number, I don't know, 8, 12, 15, say 5 of the 50 audits, you hit something regarding a specific regulation, let's say DORA. And of course, whenever something is not okay regarding this DORA regulation, you will include that in your report. Now, the thing is, of course, when you are feeling okay with what you see, is it then also a conclusion? Because there will be nothing in the report that it's okay. Can you also make an overall statement regarding DORA? That's going to be hard, I suppose, because from a different single audit view, making a conclusion from the dimension of a law regulation is different than saying something about a business process and a business objective. We're gonna come to this topic later on, this mind topic. In the audit assurance, so it's going to be relevant to think ahead with the end in mind. If you are planning to shape a multi-purpose universe, how are you going to do this? Where to start, and what type of risk assessment, for example, to be used? What are you going to take into account if you make this universe? Because it's going to be already difficult to think the structure, but also to think about the type of work you're going to plan in it. For me, it's always very difficult to understand how a audit year plan will be substantive to also prepare and create conclusions towards a different dimension. So it's easy to make an audit conclusion on a certain product, a certain department, but then to say something about culture and behavior for the company as such, it's going to take more time and more audit work to have a profound coverage on the topic. Well, this is something, looks like a jigsaw puzzle. In fact, it is also a jigsaw puzzle. And these 120, they represent a universe, like the universe we had, say, 5 to 8 years ago. And in this universe, it's quite easy to choose, let's say, this orange part. And in this orange part, you can analyze the type of risks, the type of controls you want to test upon, and then at the end, make your conclusion. A very tiny audit. And you could choose another orange one, and therefore also do the same work. These audits will therefore make a conclusion and cover a certain area, but they have no relationship, these audits. So if you would, for example, find a problem in a operations department, which is originating from the sales department, the connection is not there. In fact, it could be that the sales department audit is planned in Q4 of the year and the operations department is planned in Q1. So there is no relationship. The year after this year, the jigsaw puzzle would also look completely different because the company changed, the structure of the processes changed. So whatever you concluded upon in previous years on a certain jigsaw part is very fast outdated and not relevant anymore for the future. So if you have a cyclical way of planning audit work, it's going to be difficult to understand how the cycle for this orange part will be connected to the orange part in the next years to come. And if you would then have to answer a question being raised by the board or by a third party, a supervisor, can you demonstrate how you, with your cycles, did your audit work over the past years on a specific process? You're gonna be challenged to make a good storyline on this because the company changed so much. You cannot align these puzzle parts anymore from the past. So also in our company, we made a development. Some 4 years ago, we started with translating and leaving the part of the jigsaw puzzle, we moved to a value chain approach. In my presentation of last year, I gave you some more detail how this value chain approach works. But I can assure you, for us, it works very nice because we identified some 37, technically 38 value chains, and these are quite stable. They will never change. So one of the value chains is, for example, savings processes. You can imagine a bank has saving processes, and these will never change. Well, technically for the most banks, maybe they will get a little bit bigger or smaller, but the technicality remains the same. So it's way easier to allocate audit work based on a risk assessment in this saving process, and therefore to see how the audit work from the previous year is going to be evolving and relevant still for the years to come. So this is definitely a step up compared to the old jigsaw puzzle. Are we there yet? Is this the Holy Grail? Not really, because what is of course the advantage? Well, it creates a very stable audit universe. It's there is a possibility to have a clear communication with the auditees because they also recognize these value chains. It supports oversight and insight and avoids silo-oriented audit views because you definitely know if you're going to do something in the operations department that there is also an audit planned in the sales department, for example, because it's in the same value chain. So it creates more oversight and insight for us as auditors, but also at the end of the year for the auditees. However, it also has some shortcomings. Why? Because it doesn't give an overview for overarching topics, like, for example, the law I just mentioned or the regulation regarding DORA. This is going through the entire company, and it doesn't stimulate thinking in this way for themes, for culture and behavioral kind of themes, or for all kind of privacy topics. So this will not be covered, these problems will not be covered by a value chain audit universe. So we thought further. And well, what are the things we then miss if we just do regular audit work in value chains? We miss something like the analytical views we have on the culture and behavior. We do not know everything about compliance risks or market conducts or specific sanctions. You can imagine with all the international activities going on between countries that a bank is being requested to provide an overview to the supervisor. Can you give me an overview of all the activities you do per country? Or can you give me a statement that you comply with sanction policies? And then auditors getting a request, and we have to say, we are not able to do such audit work because our universe is not capable of planning this type of work. and then you're too late because you have to do all kind of ad hoc audit work. So why not thinking ahead at the beginning of the year with your universe that these type of questions are likely to come up in the future? So what do we miss? Well, the world is changing and expectations alike. So your board, like our board, will likely ask questions. Did we adhere to sanctions? Are we compliant with the Cybersecurity Act? Do we adhere to regulation on privacy? And of course, in our case, the many EBA, ECB type of regulations. You could answer as auditor, of course, well, this is something for the legal department or for the compliance department. But in the end, I think it's very relevant to think already about at least the design of these type of controls relevant to understand this, because in the next years to come, more and more countries are asking board members to sign off in their annual accounts a statement regarding governance, regarding compliance, and then board members are held personally liable. So they do want confirmation in the future from audit departments to understand if they can sign off these statements. And of course, you can audit the process on managing sanction policies, but will you do so after a breach is appearing or before? Because you could already have seen that the design was not fully proof with controls in this process. I have a next poll coming up, and my interest would be if you have any requests from boards or supervisors or external parties, third parties, for providing assurance, opinions of certain themes. Well, first one is no. And the second one is, well, only from the board on certain incidents, whenever they occurred. Well, we got them regularly from the board because there is so much upcoming national and international EU regulation. And we get them from the board, supervisor, third parties all the time. So the first one is no. The second one, incidentally. The third one is only internally, regarding all kind of regulation, and the fourth one is about both internally and externally all the time. I see that the audience is quite hands-on, so answers are coming in quite fast.
Yeah, that's always good.
Yeah.
76, well, 81%. Going to the 90% again. We're going to close the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1.
Yeah. And I'm very interested in the answers. Okay, so this is interesting. So the majority we have in the group are seeing lots of requests coming from the boards on incidents. I suppose that's logical. The board normally tends to a department who is flexible and ad hoc capable of investigating incidents. But more than a third of the group also sees not only internal but also external requests. And that's the same happening in my company, that you see upcoming requests more frequently. And then you also have a difficulty that your reported conclusion is going outside. So methodology questions, quality questions, coverage, how you base your conclusion, the text formulation of your conclusion. Are you able to to do so? Will it be in a contained environment, or is it open for public? So lots of difficulty then arises. I think that for me, regarding the webinar now, the most difficult thing is how are you going to show and demonstrate that you covered the topic sufficiently with evidence to make your conclusion. Yeah, going back to the universe and preparing for the conclusions later on in the year to come. What are the things we miss, both in the jigsaw puzzle and in the value chain approach? Well, what are the things we miss in the value chain approach? We do all kinds of audit work in value chains. Like I said, we have 38 value chains, but we do not yet specific audits or take into account everything regarding, say, specific regulations. Well, I'm working in a bank, so for me, for example, DORA is relevant. I can imagine not for everyone here, but I suppose GDPR is for everyone relevant. Now, if you plan all kind of audit work in a value chain or in your own maybe jigsaw Audit Universe, GDPR will be relevant for virtually all audit work planned. However, it's not a jigsaw puzzle piece. And the same is happening in this value chain. GDPR is relevant for all the value chains and for all the audit work done, but it's not as such audit. So how are you going to do audit work in a way that you can also aggregate the findings in the regular, say, horizontal audit work activities towards a vertical conclusion? That's really a mind-boggling thing to understand, first of all, in the planning, that you will hit sufficient audit work for your value chain approach, and in the same time be able to consolidate the audit work, findings, and the conclusions towards a certain theme. Because it's going to be important to give information, either internal or external, to stakeholders about GDPR, cyber resilience. And you're not going to get away with it saying, well, we did 4 audits in the value chain or in the jigsaw puzzle, and we came to the conclusions that we have some issues. That's something else to say that you have 3 issues regarding cyber resilience. That's something else to say we are compliant. However, we have issue 1, 2, 3 regarding cyber resilience, because then it means you have covered it up. Of course, there is another approach. You're saying, well, we're using the jigsaw puzzle format, we plan audit work, and we plan extra. We plan extra for themes, theme 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And likely in the future, you will have so many themes that you will have 2 or 3 universes for the same type of planning work, because it's going to be very complex with a lot of trees in your forest to focus upon. So the question is, can we conclude on the design of effectiveness in controls and value chains, and at the same time also conclude on company-wide compliancy or specific regulation? Well, you might say that's not so relevant because that's something to do with the first line or the compliance department or people from operations or legal. However, bear in mind, and I only mentioned here 3, that if you're not compliant with DORA, and this is active as January next year, the fine can be quite high. So I mentioned here 2% of your total annual worldwide turnover. The same as for the EU artificial intelligence, also active and relevant now, is going to be 7% of your total worldwide annual turnover. GDPR already applicable for some years. Big fines are there if you're not compliant. So I think, first of all, you can wait until the question comes up from your board asking, can you give me a conclusion if we are compliant, if the controls are there, that everything which is not okay, will be reported upon. Or you can say, I'm going to plan this already in my work because this is relevant for my company, that we need to be hygienically in control of being compliant for this regulation. And if something pops up, we are not compliant, it's too late. So it's about managing expectations. So your board, of course, can go to a compliance department and legal. Please make me an overview. Can you give me assurance? Can you list me for my in control statement for the annual accounts for all the troubles I have? And will you then be able to answer? Well, maybe in the past your answer would be, sure, it's going to be easy. However, believe it or not, I suppose it's not going to be so easy. Because the tough question will be, did you have sufficient coverage for your conclusion? Of course, you did lots of audit work on individual assignments, and you are able to maybe add up the 20 assignments in one value chain, in one department or in one business line. But it will not be the same to say, to understand that your working program was also complete for covering DORA or the Cyber Resilience Act, because the board will ask questions, and it's going to be worse if a supervisor comes in because they ask you, can you share with me your audit file? And then you have to be open and transparent on the work you've done. So coverage in a regular audit is already one thing, but covering an entire company to conclude on a theme is going to be something else, especially if a regulator comes in, because they want to see the work you've done and the way you formulated the conclusion based on the coverage and the work you've done. And be sure that it's easier to make 3, 4, 5 findings than to say everything is okay, because it certainly requests a full coverage of the theme or legislation. I have a 4th poll coming up. And the question is, at the end of an audit or at the end of the year, do you measure as individual or as department if you achieved sufficient coverage for sustaining your conclusions? So did you complete your working program for your conclusion? Did you complete all the activities you've done to make your conclusion about a legislation, about culture and behavior, about all kinds of topics which should normally be digested out of the regular audit work? Question A is, sorry, you may be already filling in. Question A is, no, I'm not doing this. This would be surprising because this is a request also in the IPPF standards, but likely you will fill in B, C, or D. We're doing that at the end of an audit via a completion document or testing of the completion of the working program. C, we're doing this both for working programs, individual assignments, as for theme-based audits. And we're always doing this both at an individual level, but also via a performance test self-assessment of the entire department at the end of the year.
There we go again. %81.
I'm looking forward to the answers. We have an active audience.
Yeah, that's always good to see.
Yeah.
85%. Let's go to the 90. We're closing the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. and
Yeah.
closed. There we go. Still quite some no's, Norbert.
Yeah, so it's quite a diverse answer. So some of you say 1 out of 8 is saying we don't test any sufficiency of coverage. Then 1 on 3 is saying only at the end of an audit via the completion. I suppose this is indeed something which is very common for people, for auditors. And also 1 on 3, a little bit more, is saying it's both at the end of assignments and also a self-assessment on the performance of the department. I'm personally with our audit department, we're at the end of indeed answer D. We are both doing the assessment as a quality and improvement session test at the end of an assignment, and also at the end of the year, understanding how the audit department is performing and if we achieve our objectives as a department in realizing the planning as such, and why we diverged from the planning. We're doing extra work. Was the extra work relevant? What did we cancel? Etc. etc. So this is interesting. And I hope with these answers you get a sort of an awareness about how you understand if your coverage was sufficient to base your conclusions. In the survey we conducted 2-3 years ago, we saw that most of the audit departments are creating audit reports, audit products with a conclusion. I suppose that's also something we will all recognize in this webinar. At the end of an assignment, whether it's a regular assignment, a special one, or it's an analysis, you create a conclusion based on the work you've done and the findings you have. The thing is that at that time, we already also saw that most of us don't have a specific requirement for minimum coverage of the universe. So we have a large universe in our departments. If you count, for example, in the jigsaw puzzle thing, it's my example was 120. In our own company, we have a value chain with 38. Likely you have something else, and there is no mandatory requirement to cover. Well, this is indeed, I'm afraid also to say, for our company, there is no minimum coverage. So it's in the end professional judgment, how you understand, how you conclude that your coverage realized is sufficient for making conclusions, both at an individual audit report, but also at business line level or at company-wide level, especially when you make conclusions in a management letter overall for the company, or if you make a report on a certain theme or a specific change project. Coverage in the end is always relevant, but there is no specific regulation formulated, also not in our department. Now the question, of course, will this change with the upcoming regulation? So it already happens that the supervisor, the ECB, is coming in our department and asking specific coverage on certain topics. So, and it's not about saying yes or no or making a sort of a contract or trade. They just say dear auditor, you have to cover this type of processes at the maximum within 3 years, and certain areas every year. So coverage will be more and more important. Now the thing is also looking at an individual assignment. If you start an assignment, you're making your working program, you're formulating your conclusions, you'll likely say something about what was in the audit, what was outside of the audit, and you will formulate all the findings and issues you have, coming to a conclusion whether the framework is sufficient or insufficient, or whatever formulation you use. Now the question is, if you don't have any findings on, for example, an IT system, an IT network, financial controls, culture and behavioral aspects, and you did not exclude these topics in your conclusion, can a reader then interpret that it's included and it was okay? Or should a reader be informed in a different way? And if you are saying, yes, Norbert, it's included in our audit work and it's also included in the conclusion, are you able to substantify the covering of these topics? Because making a list of things which are not okay as finding is something different than saying all the controls on all these topics are working fine. So if you define the audit universe, you have to think about the end in mind. The multi-purpose mindset is important. And our journey in my company brought us from the jigsaw puzzle format towards a value chain, towards a multidimensional model in which we identify all kinds of regulations or themes going through the value chain, where we make assessments on relevant audit work through the value chains, that's horizontally, but also make assessments on the relevance of doing audits vertically. And that could mean that there will be specific audits planned horizontally, where we aggregate findings and conclusions towards a vertical topic, or the vertical topic is so big that we plan a theme on it to get sufficient evidence and conclusions for the topic as such. To do so, you have to plan, you have to create a universe up front. It's impossible to do this during the year. So you have to think whenever you plan for the next year. In our case, for example, we plan in October, November for the year to come. So this year, somewhere in September, October, November, we have to create the universe or update the universe for 2025 and think about what are the messages, the reports, the products we have to deliver to our board, supervisory board, external stakeholders, media parties, whatever they are, and what type of audit work do we need to do. And I suppose the majority of the audit work, more than 60%, will go to internal stakeholders. But there is also a large chunk of the audit work which is relevant to be done, to be covering for other stakeholders, not being the board. Well, with this in mind, you can plan ahead, and it makes life easier for you than being confronted with a shortage of your coverage during the year. So if you look at the pros and cons of such a, universe, we first look at the jigsaw puzzle. Well, like I said, it's very simple and convenient to start with because it creates transparency, and it's an easy thing to also plan audit work upon, because likely one audit assignment is one jigsaw puzzle part. So you can pinpoint all of them over the company, and everyone will be risk rated, gives a priority, and therefore a planning of audit work easy to communicate in the audit department. The con is there is no consolidated view, neither for the value chain and neither to themes or legislation. And there is a risk that related processes in the company are audited in different years, in different quarters, and the reconciliation between the processes and the problems laying there are not visible. The other one is the value chain. Well, the pros are, of course, it follows the business processes. You can have a good discussion with your auditees because everything is structured in a way they also understand. And you can also see root causes coming from different parts of the processes affecting other parts of the processes. So it's also a nice way of understanding holistically how the framework for the value chain works. The counter is that it doesn't provide any coverage information or only signals at the best for all kinds of consolidated themes relevant or legislation. So this is something to take into account. The last one, by far the most complex, of course, provides all kinds of coverage both to value change, to individual assignments, and gives an opportunity to talk to board members and lower management stakeholders. It gives input for internal control statements, and it gives input for supervisory needs regarding themes and legislation. The downside is it's very complex, and you have to really also spend time in planning for preparing this universe, and planning also to think which type of audit is done in which part of the year, because they're highly interacted. And if you really want to, for example, consolidate findings coming from one theme in 3 or 4 audits planned in value chain, you have to plan these 3, 4 audits in different value chains together in one quarter to be able to aggregate findings. So it's managerial, by far the most difficult one. Yeah, in the end, what type of approach to choose, it really depends on your mission. The mission for most of us will be to provide assurance, but then to whom? Who's your stakeholder? Is it something company-wide you want to provide audit opinions to? Is it regarding themes, or is it external stakeholders? That highly depends on the environment you're working in. So if you really want to make choices, I would say think about what is your assurance about? Where do you give assurance about on? How do you structure the universe? And how are you going to allocate audit work in your auditable entities, both in the entities as such, but also in the timing during the year, in the value change or in the themes, to be able to aggregate and consolidate findings and views. So if you want to think about where your audit opinions are based upon, I would like to give you the following analogy. It's not about the proof of the pudding, but I would say the proof of the cheese is eating it. Are you going to make conclusions on the holes in the cheese of the audit you've done? Or are you going to try to consolidate your findings on different type of audit works? It looks like a cheese one, but it's in fact a lot of different cheeses. Or are you going to look at the company as a whole? And making these conclusions, making these assumptions are really important to plan them already upfront instead of during the year or after the year, because then your audit work is not plannable anymore. My final remark would therefore be planning a universe, creating it, and also setting things in motion, begin with the end in mind. With this, I come to the end of my presentation. So first of all, I would like to thank you a lot for being there, for filling in all the polls. It really is interesting for me to see how you as attendees are able to do with this. And I think we have some time available for some questions coming up. Geert-Jan?
Yes. One of the questions that caught my mind was, how did you identify the value chain in your organization? And how has having value chain-based Audit Universe affected your audits in terms of scope, complexity, and duration?
Yeah, that's a big question, a very good one. So it's not something we created overnight. So we were happy to see that the company itself also thinks in value chains. So that helped us to define. We first started with about 33, 34, but then we added up to indeed now 37 plus the last one is other processes. It also takes a lot of time to prepare, which we call BUMS, which is a business understanding memo. And this business understanding memo per value chain is a document of about 40, 50 pages, and where we describe all the relevant things of this value chain to prepare for the risk assessment to be done per value chain, but also to understand what type of IT processes, what type of legislation, what type of whatever it is relevant for that business understanding memo. And with this information in the value change, in the BUM, we aggregate information for the vertical themes. And that's the way we then plan both work horizontally and vertically out of the multipurpose universe.
Yeah, thank you very much, Norbert. It's quite a, let's say, complex answer, which maybe cannot be answered in just a few minutes. But
yeah, well, I'm happy. Like I said, I'm via QR code. You can reach me. I'm happy to dwell separately later on. So
yeah,
thank you for being there.
Okay, we're on the top of the hour. We even exceeded the hour. I would really like to thank you very much for presenting your vision on this. It's definitely very much appreciated that you were able to provide your vision. As you already mentioned, please connect with Norbert and or Teammate also on how Teammate can help you in achieving this, regardless of the Audit Universe scenario you are in. So we're always happy to think along and to provide assistance on the journey in internal audit. Thank you very much, and hope to see you next time at another webinar.